Welcome to part 2 of Query Loop-a-Palooza. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to build out a query loop based on a custom post type for a portfolio. I'll first show you how I set up that custom post type with ACF, and then the end result we're going for, and we'll go ahead and build out that query loop. Let's get started. All right, so this is the query loop that we're going to be building out today. And as I mentioned, this is going to be based off of displaying portfolio grid. And so this one is kind of utilizing the idea of a design firm that does package design for products. So we've got a few different mock-ups here and some fake names and an overall design that we're going to be going for. So I'll show you real quickly. On the back end, I created a custom post type with ACF called portfolio. And I also set up some taxonomy for the portfolio called portfolio types, so that it'll allow us to create a few different categories for the portfolios and display what you see here, the categories for skincare, for food and drink, and for home. All right, so once I created that post type, you can now see under portfolio, we've got a new menu item here with our 3 posts already populated and ready to go. And how these are set up is simply just featured image as that main image here that you see on the query loop design. And then on the portfolio types, I've selected the category for that specific portfolio piece. So now we can go ahead and jump into our portfolio page and start building out this query loop. What I'm first going to do is insert a container block. And we'll open up our sidebar menu here so you can follow along with the structure. And I'm going to put in a global class for container medium. This global class that I always utilize just sets up some padding for me on my container. So then we'll add a inner container, and inside that inner container, we're going to put in our query loop block. Now, since we're building out a pretty custom design here that really doesn't fit any of the default settings that Generate Blocks gives you, we're just going to start blank. All right, so once we open up our query loop block and display all of the nested blocks now inside of it, we've got our looper block and our loop item block. And our looper block, we want to make sure and set this to a 3-column grid, because that is the layout that we're also going for on this query loop. Now, before we go any further though, we want to come back to our query block here at the highest level, and we need to make sure it's pulling in our portfolio posts, not the default post. So we're going to X out post type for posts and open up this drop down and choose portfolio. So now it's going to display the portfolio custom post type for us inside this query loop. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to 3 posts per page, since that's what I have set up for our demo today. All right, so now jumping back into our looper block, we've got our 3-column grid set up. And now I'm going to go in and layout and add a couple of settings for column gap. So I'm going to say 1 rem column gap and 1 rem on row gap. That way it's just adding a little bit of space in between our items here in our grid. Now we'll jump into the loop item. Now, so as I mentioned in part 1 of Query Loop-a-Palooza, when we built out that query loop based on the blog from Kinsta's website, when you create the looper grid and dictate that this is 3 columns, your individual loop item is going to inherit that and sizing of that particular grid item. So since we chose 3 columns again, our loop item is only 1/3 of the width wide. And we're only going to be building out this singular card, and it's going to populate the rest of it for us as we build it out. So let's take a look at our query loop and kind of dissect it again like we did before into the different pieces. So first at the top, we've got our featured image, and then we've got our content section, which has the category tag here, the title of our portfolio piece, Then we've got a background with the color and sort of a little watermark swoosh design in the background. So if we dissect this and start from top to bottom, we first need to add in that featured image. So I'm going to go ahead and add the image block from generate blocks. And we want to make sure this pulls in the featured image from our posts. And so we're going to choose that dynamic option and choose featured image. So now you can see it pulls all of those in, but they're not all the same size and height, and we definitely want that to be more uniform. So under height of our image, I'm going to choose about 350 maybe. Let's see, what are we working with on our design here? 400 actually. So we'll go 400. And the width, we actually want 100% because we want it to fill the entire container of our loop item container here. So we're going to set that to 100% width, 400 pixel height. And that's looking much better. And by default here, if we jump into our styles panel and media, it's going to set object fit to cover, which again is exactly what we want it to do. So next, we're going to actually add this next container for our content. And everything is going to live inside of that for the remainder of this tutorial. So we'll click our image, hit enter, and now add a new container block inside of the query loop here. Now first, I'm going to insert the background color for this so that we can visualize everything as is while we're building it. So I'm going to click this and you'll see it's got the hex code here in Figma for me, 556E6D. I didn't create a global color style for this prior, so I'm just inserting this manually. And then what we need to do is insert some padding on the block here. Now, in thinking ahead about how we're going to be overlapping the category item here with that container block and the featured image, I'm actually going to want no padding on this outer container for the top, but only on the left, the bottom, and the right. And so what I'll do then is on the left, we're going to go 1.5 rem. On the right, 1.5 rem. And on the bottom, 1.5 rem. And again, you'll kind of see how that comes into play as we continue to build this out. So what we can do next is let's go ahead and add that watermark in the background of our container here on the bottom right. You see this swoosh. I've already added this to my media library, so I'm going to come down to backgrounds, add new, and under images, select that swoosh. And now you'll see by default it's filling the entire space here of that container, but we really don't want it to be that big because in our design you can see it's actually only maybe 200 pixels wide on that entire container. So we're going to say background position bottom right, leave repeat to no repeat, and then size, I'm going to go ahead and hit these three dots and enter a custom value. It actually took me a little bit to realize that you can enter custom value by selecting those three dots, so it comes in handy when you need a custom size background image there. I'm going to insert 200 pixels and leave the remainder of those settings alone, and I think that looks pretty good for now. We can always come back and tweak later. So we'll hit the check mark to save it. And next we're going to go ahead and add that category tag here. So I'm going to insert a text block and I'm going to choose a dynamic tags option. We want to put in a terms list. So we want the source to be current post. The taxonomy, we want it to be portfolio types. If you remember, that's the taxonomy I created in ACF and created those few different categories for these posts. I'm not going to insert any type of separator because for this particular setup, I'm only going to have one category per post. And so if you happen to have multiple categories, you can insert a comma or a line or a bullet, whichever type of separator you might like for your design. And then link to, I'm going to leave that blank. I don't want to set up a link for this. And I'm going to insert the tag. So now you can see faintly we've got our tags pulled in. So we've got the home, food and drink, and skincare. And what I want to do now is style this. So I'm going to create a global class for this and call it portfolio grid and say cat for category. Now we'll leave that a blank style, and now we'll start editing this inside that global class. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to come in and get this highlight color from Figma, which is D6FC00. I'm going to go to backgrounds and insert that background color. Now you'll see it's spanning the full width of our container here, which we do not want to happen. So what I'm going to do is come up to my container that's holding my content, and I'm going to change this to display flex. And then on alignment, under flex layout, I'm going to make sure that column is selected, and then align items to the left. So now we'll jump back into my category and continue editing now that we have that set up. And we need to add some padding around our card here. So I'm going to say about 0.25 EM, 1 EM, 0.25, and 1 EM on the left. And that might be a little bit too much. So let's say 0.5 and 0.5. We can run with that for now. And the next thing we need to do is round those corners. So we come to borders and border radius. We can go ahead and just say 500 pixels. Now the text color is the same color as the background of our container. So I'm going to grab that hex code again. And inside my global class for this category, I'm going to change the text color to that. And now font size, I might do 0.75 rem. That might be too much, too little. All right, that looks pretty good. And then the additional thing we want to do is add this slight 1 pixel border all the way around in that same exact color. So I'm going to come down to borders, say 1 pixel border, and paste in that hex code once again. All right, and then what we can do if we come back to our main text block outside of the global class, because I don't necessarily want this to be tied to that global class, is insert some negative top margin. So if I say -1 rem, that actually looks pretty close to being centered in between the image and the container below it. So again, I think we'll go with that for now. And let's go ahead and save this and preview on the front end, because we've got some spacing in between our image and our container that I'm not sure is going to be reflected on the front end or not. So as we refresh, you do in fact see that space in between, and I think it's coming from the image block. So if I come in and inspect the code here, I'm not exactly sure where that space is coming from in between the image and the container. So we might have to just make it a little hacky and add some negative margin there. So if we come back to our back end and we jump into our image, and let's just start going into negative, and you can see it tightening up that space. So it looks like -6 pixels or so is the number that brings that back to 0. All right, so we've got our image in, we've got our category, and we've got our container set up here below. So now below our category, we want to add our headline of our post. And so if we come in and choose our dynamic tag and choose post title, and once again, normally I have the query loop preceded by an H2 already. So I'm going to change this to an H3. And then I need to go into spacing and zero out the bottom margin because I don't want that extra margin on the text block itself and just want that padding to dictate the space around. And then we'll come into typography and choose the text color to white. And there we have it. But now I want to tighten up the space in between that category and our title. So margin bottom on the category, I'm going to say maybe about 0.5 rem. And I think that looks pretty good for what we're going for here. Yep, I like that. And then a couple more tweaks on that category tag. I'm going to jump back into the global class in the typography settings. And I want to choose a little bit thicker of a weight on that. 700, a little bit too much. Let's go 600. And the padding, I actually like a little bit more padding on the left and the right. So I'm going to go 0.75 EMs on it. And then see about a 2 pixel border instead. The 1 pixel just feels a little bit too faint. And yes, that's exactly the look I was going for compared to my demo. All right, so we'll go ahead and save that and jump into our front end. And there you have it. It looks like we're actually still missing. We've got a little sliver of white there, I noticed. So we need to add one more negative pixel to that bottom margin of our image to tighten up that gap. But otherwise, this is looking really good. The only thing that we're missing is a link to our post. And so what I think I would like to do for this, instead of linking the entire card, probably would just link the heading itself. So first, let's go back into our image and add one more negative pixel margin there on the bottom. And then if we jump into our post title and edit the tag here for the dynamic tag, we can say link to post and then reinsert that dynamic tag. Now you'll see it does alter the look of our heading now because it changed to a link. And so what we can do, you can do it 2 different ways. We can either just edit this heading tag itself and jump into the links selector here for it, or you can actually go into the container and then under links, change the links within that container itself, and it'll affect all links inside of it. I guess in this scenario, we're not linking our category tags here, and so it wouldn't matter if we did it on the container, but if you did style the links in your container here and both of these were links, it would affect those both. So it kind of depends on your setup and what you're linking within your card. So for this sake, I'll go ahead and just choose the heading, go to the links selector and choose text color to white. And then text decoration, I'm going to choose none. Now I do want to make sure that it is apparent on hover that you can click it. So I'm going to go to adding a new selector and choose hovered links. And on the text color, I'm going to choose white and then maybe just dim it down a little bit so that it kind of creates a small hover effect there. So we'll go ahead and save that again, jump back to the front end and refresh. So now you can see we've got links set up on our post titles here, and it has that small hover effect where it changes color. We've got our category tags in place. And the other thing we can do is just double check these responsively. So as we jump down to tablet, you can see this kind of is a little bit tight and our images are really tall. So I think I would change our image down to about 300 pixel high. And in the looper, I may consider changing this down to 2-column grid instead. However, you can see once I do that, it cuts off kind of my packaging product for my portfolio, which with that being the star of the presentation here, we don't want that to be cut off. And so maybe if we delete that out and it goes back to the 400, that works better. So I guess it just depends whether you prefer a 2-column layout on tablet or 3. I think in this scenario, the 2 does look a little bit better and keeps more closely to the original proportions and constraints of desktop. So now we jump down to mobile, and we definitely need to go to our looper and set that to 1FR for mobile. And I think we actually have some room to lower the height of our images, maybe down to about 350. I think that looks pretty good for what we're going for. So we can go ahead and hit save, jump into our portfolio front end page, and we could now check out the responsive controls here in the customizer. And on tablet, you'll see it jumps down to 2 columns, no images are cut off, and on mobile, it jumps down to 1 column. So now moving forward, every time you add a new portfolio piece to your website, it's going to automatically pull into this query loop and display on your main portfolio page. That's what I really love about query loops, is the dynamic capabilities of it and how you just see things populate on the fly. All right, that was part 2 of Query Loop-a-Palooza, where we built out a query loop based on a custom post type for a portfolio. Coming up in part 3 of Query Loop-a-Palooza, we're going to build out a query loop based on a news article grid layout. So this one's a little bit more complex, and it could come in handy for those types of websites that are content heavy. If you have any other query loop ideas, I'd love to build them out. Go ahead and leave a comment below with the type of query loop you would love to see, and I'll definitely consider it. Thanks a lot for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Part 3 coming out soon, and we'll see you soon.